You're a man now. Congratulations. Welcome to Is It In Yet? The show where interesting topics are discussed by uninformed people. I'm Steve. Brian is not with us today. I am here with Uncle Jon. What's up, Uncle Jon?
Same old stuff, man. Good to be back.
Good.
So ready to drink some beast.
All right. Jon and I are going to be playing a little bit of a drinking game. A little bit kind of like a get to know you thing, since like the first episode, Brian and I kind of did a little bit of that. And Jon just kind of jumped right into it with us. So we'll get to that in a minute. A couple quick things, though. You can now listen to the show on Spotify and Stitcher. And maybe by the time this is posted, also Google Play. But one place you might not actually be able to listen to, at least for now, is iTunes. iTunes sent our podcast a rejection.
Really?
Yeah.
For what purpose?
No clue, man. No freaking clue. I saw it the second before I was driving over here. I ran back home to grab the equipment. Mm-hmm. I checked my email real quick, and we got a rejection letter. And it's been going over it in my mind. I can't think of a single reason. I think it's because of the name.
Could be.
Because, for one thing, it's definitely not the content. I've heard so many, worse podcasts than the one that we're recording right now.
I listened to an episode of Mysterious Universe this week where they talked about
push that mic closer.
Where they talked about voodoo medicine and people getting chopped up and heads in vats of honey, and I think the most controversial thing we've talked about is flat Earth.
Yeah.
So I think we're okay.
I don't get it. See, this again goes back to our conversation about why the whole YouTube algorithm thing has scared so many YouTubers, and why it scares me as a new content creator, because I'm betting iTunes has some sort of similar algorithm where not a real person is sitting in front and sitting down and reviewing this stuff. They're using a robot, an AI, to look through stuff. And if you might be the person who has a show with the title, Is It In Yet? That's going to be a flag right away. I probably didn't help the situation that the show description is very brief. It's what have we been saying? Interesting topics by uninformed people. That's all I wrote in the description of the show.
Okay.
So that's very vague. And they probably look at those two things. I doubt they're really even listening to the content, because part of the reason they make these AIs, I'm assuming, is because who has time, as a physical person, to sit and review all that?
Right.
But
I would assume that they definitely can't have somebody just going through and listening to hours and hours of content. But again, I don't think ours would by any metric be something that's controversial. So I don't know what...
We're just like three idiots talking about stupid stuff.
That pretty much sums it up, right?
And to continue on that track, I decided to come up with a little drinking game to make it fun, so it gives us a way to kind of give people out there who are listening a chance, to learn a little bit more about us and what we believe and stuff. But first, actually, I want to get into one thing real quick. Do you have any idea why I called you Uncle Jon when I started this? Because
both my uncles are named John?
No.
No? I have no idea.
Okay. Well, so you're going to learn more about Jon, but obviously if you don't know, that much about him, he is married. He has 2 kids, stepdaughter and a son, right?
Correct.
Okay. A couple of ridiculously wild dogs, and that's kind of his life right now. But your kid is what? He's 2?
Yes. Or he's 3, going to be 4.
Okay. So is he in daycare or?
No, he is in preschool.
Preschool.
And my daughter Lex is in 1st grade.
Okay. So your wife posted this picture a couple weeks ago, maybe, of a thing that Theo apparently wrote. So I just want to go over this because I need you to explain some of these choices.
All right.
Okay. So my dad's name is Uncle John.
There is an explanation for that. There is an explanation.
He's right there. Do you want to ask him?
Theo, why do you call me Uncle John? He's being shy and doesn't want to answer.
Okay.
So, but the reason he calls me Uncle John is because my niece calls me Uncle John.
Uh-huh.
So whenever I have to pick my son up at my mother's house while she's watching him, my niece is also there, and she always goes, "Hi, Uncle John." So Theo refers to me as Uncle John. Somewhat more benign than...
That one's vetted. That's fine. My dad's favorite food is broccoli.
Yes. Because broccoli is very easy to steam, and I eat it with every meal.
Okay. So what you're saying is you eat a lot of broccoli.
I eat a lot of broccoli, yes.
Because you're trying to get healthier or stay healthy. But mostly it's because you're lazy, and so he sees you eat a lot of broccoli.
Pretty much,
okay.
Yeah.
My dad's favorite color is white.
Well, him and I had a debate about this.
Okay.
Like the other day, and he was asking me whether my favorite color was white or my favorite color was green.
Oh.
So, and I told him after reading that it was white, just simply for the fact that that's what he put down. So that's how that came about.
All right. Favorite game is Sharks. That one makes sense to
yes. My son is obsessed with Sharks.
Yeah, I've played Sharks with him too, so that makes sense. This one, though.
Okay.
Holy fuck. My dad is good at driving.
Even he knows that's a joke.
That is, you are a terrible driver.
I am a terrible driver.
And I'm not a good driver either.
If there's a battle for worst driver, it's between you and me.
So that was what? Just
probably because it's the thing that he probably sees me do the most other than exercise and be dadding him.
Okay. My dad likes to wear new pants. I've known you for, let's see, we met when we were 13, 14, mm-hmm. So about 16, 17 years.
Close to, yeah.
I've never seen you wear more than one pair of fucking jeans at a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So where does this new pants thing come from?
I have no clue. I literally, in my closet right now, I have 2 pairs of work pants that I wear and 1 pair of jeans. And the only reason I even have 1 pair of jeans is simply because of the fact that when I go out, I don't want to wear my khakis. So...
Okay, so maybe he sees you change them a lot?
Well, no, I don't even change them. I've been wearing the same pair of pants for about 4 days now. So I don't know where that comes from.
You got to stop letting him run into the wall, dude. That could be the problem.
Is that why you're laughing? Because you ran into the wall today? Twice? Yeah, he's shaking his head.
Oh, Theo. My dad's job is to work. Okay, that's...
So there's a little bit more of a backstory to this, though. Because
I was just going to skip right over that. But
there could be more answers that he could potentially give. So for those of you who aren't our family or friends, I am a licensed social worker. Mm-hmm. So I work currently at a hospital helping out with people who have complex psychosocial issues. So people who have substance abuse issues or mental health issues and a lot of different things. As I said, my son is about to be 4 and can't understand the complexities of probably what I do.
I can kind of see why he's hitting his head all the time, because what I'm seeing right now and what everyone else is probably hearing is him jumping from your lap to chair to table.
Right, right. He's bouncing back and forth.
You're wild, man, dude.
So, but when I tell him, he asks me what I do for work all the time, and I tell him there are monsters that I fight at work. So he could have said, my daddy fights monsters at work.
But he didn't. He chose the much more boring...
Right, of just work.
Just work.
Just work.
Okay, the other ones make sense. My favorite thing to do with my dad is hug him. That's nice. Aw.
It is. We finish every night with a big hug.
And I love my dad because I snuggle with him. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's sweet.
Every night I sit on my couch and read comic books, and he snuggles with me and watches YouTube.
So the drinking game that I was kind of devised here is really just like a question and answer game. Mm-hmm. That John and I will ask each other questions, try and guess what the other person is going to say. It could be as vague as it could be as simple as what's your favorite color. Mm-hmm. I'm going to guess that one right now because I know it's white.
Clearly.
If I get it right, then he has to drink. If I get it wrong, then I have to drink, and then we'll just switch back and forth.
Okay. So I thought before we get into the game, it might not be a bad idea to maybe explain how we came to know each other, just so I'll say the people who are listening have an understanding that our relationship stems pretty far back, and it's not something that had anything to do with podcasting.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess I can start off the story.
Yeah, go for it.
But growing up, I had a neighbor who went to the same school as Steve, and while that neighbor one time decided to throw a party, and he explained it to us as a big giant party that a bunch of people were going to come to, and it was going to be a packed house. It's going to be the most popular shindig in this side of the Mississippi. Instead, only Steve showed up. So what it ultimately... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's kind of sad on my part that like I'm the only one, because I either fell for it or I mean, I'm going to argue the fact and say that I just kind of felt bad for the guy.
Mm-hmm. Understandably.
He did become our friend like after a while, but yes. Okay. So I was the only one that showed up. You can go on.
So Steve showed up, and I think after grilling him for about an hour and a half about our...
Yeah, let me set the scene really quick. So I showed up. No one else from our school did, but this friend of ours, you know, you guys grew up in like a neighborhood where there are a couple kids living around.
Yep.
So like you guys all kind of became friends, and you kind of knew this kid liked to like spin yarns and tell tall tales.
Yep.
So you all showed up. The neighborhood kids all showed up because he hyped up like he was going to have this big party, right? He would tell you stories about how like he was the most popular kid in school. And so you showed up basically because you wanted to call him on his bullshit. So what ends up happening is me sitting around a bunch of strangers from the neighborhood just asking me all sorts of questions about... His name is Dan, okay? Mm-hmm. The guy subscribed to our Facebook page. I don't know if he listens to podcasts, but there's a good chance he might listen to this anyway. He knows his backstory. So
he was there at the birth of our relationship. Some could say he's responsible for the birth of our relationship.
He is. In a lot of ways, he is. But yeah, so me sitting around being grilled just about Dan. People I don't know at this point, right? Mm-hmm, so you can take it from there.
So basically at that point, we start talking to Steve about all of the, different tall tales that our buddy has told us. And eventually we come to realize that Steve and I have very, very similar tastes in music, which at this point I would say it was like the typical 14-year-old style of music, pop punk. We were both into Blink-182 and Green Day,
pop punk, yeah.
Phoenix TX,
yep.
Things like that. I think at some point Steve and I eventually realized that he plays guitar and I play drums. So we go over to my house where my drum set is set up in my room, and we basically just start playing Green Day songs. Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, it was...
it was the simplest one that anyone could play.
Brain Stew? Is that which one it was? So we play this. Steve tells me that him and his buddies are in a band, and I can't remember if you were looking for a drummer at the time or... Okay.
Yep.
And asked me if I wanted to play in the band. So I was like, yeah. I'm sorry. He didn't ask me. He said I had to officially try out for the band.
Did I say that?
I don't know if you said that, but I remember trying out with you and Brian and Mike standing in my room and basically just said play. And I played like a Ramones beat, like the simplest drum beat. And then you guys said, yeah. And I was in the band. Right. This was this was a different party that more people ended up showing up to. That happened like a month later.
Right.
So, so now I'm in this band, and we never actually practiced.
Right.
But at some point, Steve ends up calling me, and I just remember the phone call going something like this: "Those assholes kicked me out of the band. Let's start our own band." And we did.
Those were my exact words. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that first band. So Brian and I have known each other since like 4th grade. So at some point, when we started getting into like punk music and stuff with our friend Mike, the three of us started this band. And then, for one reason or another, I'll let Brian tell his side of the story too, so he can actually defend himself. We can revisit that part. But yeah, they kicked me out since we had never officially practiced with Jon, and I thought it was my right because I knew him first anyway. I called him and we started jamming, and so we've been friends ever since. And then not long after that, though, Mike joined us for our first ever live gig, which was a high school or a junior high talent show.
No, high school talent show.
High school talent show.
Our freshman year, I think it was.
And then Brian joined us soon after. So eventually, it all did become one band.
Right.
But yeah, so we've known each other since we were like 13 or 14. So we know a lot about each other.
We do.
Basically.
Which I'll say the reason I thought it would be a good idea to go over that is because I think it gives a little context to the conversation, knowing that we know a lot about each other. Yeah. In addition to knowing each other's soft spots. So there could be a lot of questions that could potentially touch on areas. Hopefully not hopefully not too invasive, I should say. So, but yeah, I think that gives a little context to the backstory. So, and I will say, I think that one of the interesting things about our friend group, and just so most people know, that our friend group isn't just me, Steve, and Brian. I'll say I was the latecomer to the group, and I'd say I think all of us have had the same friend group for, at least for me, since high school, and for them obviously longer. We've had the same group of five or six guys. Yeah. And all of us still talk and still hang out, and some of us have moved across the country, and then one of us moved back.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, somewhat back, but we all still are in contact with each other as much as we can be.
If this game gets interesting at all, it would be good to have other friends come on and play it with us and see how much we can actually guess right about them.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, okay. Well, with that, we've already cracked open our beers. I've been sipping mine for a little bit. Jon got his first taste of the beast. He became a man today.
It's a horrible choice.
I don't know. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
We'll start. Well, I'll start. And this is one that is, I'll say, a somewhat of an easy icebreaker. And part of the reason that I'm asking it is because I think I already know the answer to it, but we'll see. But my question is, what is your favorite punk album of all time?
Oh, all right. Should I answer?
Well, I think. Well, should I say the one that I think it is?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there might be a little bit of debate about whether this is considered a punk album, but I think the band is clearly a punk band, but I'm going with The Clash, London Calling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nailed it.
And I drink. And I absolutely believe it's a punk album because I think it was kind of a revolutionary style for the punk scene at the time. But I think the same energy, the same message, the same community is all behind that album, you know? So, I mean, yeah, I would consider that a punk album. And yeah, it is definitely and if you don't, that's fine, but it's definitely one of my favorite albums of all time. Maybe the favorite, for sure.
Okay. I'd agree. I think it's tough because I think The Clash, especially their first album, I think is probably their most punk album that they have. I think the later years of The Clash definitely bridged a lot of different things that stepped outside of maybe what would be known as the punk world. But but yeah, I'd say it's definitely one of my, I'll say, top 10 albums for sure.
Well, they came from different influences, which is kind of what I think always interested me about them. You know, Mick Jones obviously came with a more like pop and glam kind of style. Joe Strummer was very into like reggae and some of like the I guess you'd say like folkier or bluesier stuff. Paul Simonon was very into like hip hop and reggae. Right. And I don't really know anything about Topper, so I can't really.
Other than being a badass drummer.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's see. I gotta ask you a question now.
Yes.
I feel like it should be a music question. Did you ever, because we've talked about too about like bands that we used to like, bands that we say we never liked, you know, because like I talked about this with Brian on the first episode, how when you first like get into the music that we like, you get into the scene too. So like you start looking at all of these bands, like the Casualties and this and that, and you're into it for like a second, but you were into it at some point until you find like your own style that you actually like or don't like, you know what I mean? Instead of like looking at it just because they're like a popular name versus whatever. So in your life, did you ever like Rancid?
I guess you have to.
See, I think you did.
In all honesty, I can't really say that I did.
Damn it.
And I'll put it like this: it's not that I never liked them. I guess I should say it was that they were just never one of my go-to punk bands.
I remember us listening to Rancid together. I remember I liked Rancid. So I might have just assumed, but I was trying to catch you.
Right.
All right.
Well, and here's one of the hard things I think about punk music too is that listening to older punk bands, and I wouldn't necessarily consider Rancid an older punk band, but at our age, they were a band that was already pretty well established.
That's true. They started like in the 90s, like early 90s. I think. So yeah.
Punk is a very cookie cutter style of music. So I think what ends up happening is once a band bands start to all kind of, I wouldn't say meld into each other. They all have their own kind of unique styles. But the bands who maybe, I wouldn't say originated styles, but are most known within a style of music become somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? They become somewhat stale because every other band sounds like them. Or, there's a lot of bands that are influenced by them that mimic that same sound. So I think that was kind of Rancid. What Rancid ended up being for me is I listened to bands that sounded like Rancid. But because they sounded like Rancid, I always thought Rancid sounded stereotypical.
Yeah, okay.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Okay. Your turn.
Favorite non-punk album?
I have to think about this one for a second.
I'll have to think about it too because I don't know if I know. I have one that I think it could be for you, but it's a debatable one.
All right. Well, how about this? To save you the time of me thinking about it, why don't you just tell me and I'll tell you if you're close.
At the Gates, Slaughter of the Soul. Is that I don't know if that's the album name. I think that might just be the song.
I would say, I don't know. I think we both have to take a drink on that one because I kind of classify a lot of like the punk and heavier stuff into like one category for me. When you asked me that question, I was thinking more along the lines of like, what kind of mainstream albums do I like, or what kind of like mainstream or like indie influence bands do I like, you know?
Right.
Because there's a lot of music that isn't punk or like on that heavy side anymore that I do like.
Right. That makes sense.
You know, there's a couple Foo Fighter albums that I really like. There's a couple of Modest Mouse albums that I really like. So I was thinking more like that, and I couldn't think of my favorite. So I'll drink on that one because
I'll drink for you as well. I think for me, I don't know if I classify it as my favorite.
Let me guess. Let me just guess one because I might be thinking now what you're not thinking.
Okay.
Viva La Vida by Coldplay.
God no. God no.
Really? You love Coldplay.
I enjoyed one of their albums.
Oh, shut up. No, you love Coldplay.
X and Y, man, it's a great album. It's a great album. There's some good songs on Viva La Vida too, I will say. It's not my favorite, but it's a good album. It's a decent album.
You were jamming out to all of those albums.
I had a moment.
When we were in college.
I had a moment.
Oh, you had a moment. You can't, Mr. Hardcore Punk over here can't even admit he likes soft music like Coldplay.
I was going to say, actually, my probably is Interpol.
Okay.
Either Antics or I think it's Turn on the Bright Lights, I think is the name of the album.
Turn on the Bright Lights. Yeah, that's probably the one that we know the best.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that album, both those albums were albums that still to this day I'll put on this to jam.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic band. So.
Absolutely.
All right. I'm taking another hard one. The famous debate.
Oh God, here we go.
Who do you consider started punk? What band? Think about it, and then I'll name who I think you're gonna say.
Okay. All right. I think I got my answer.
I think you're gonna tell me it was Iggy Pop.
I'm not, but I was.
Son of a bitch!
Steve's gonna be hammered by the end of this.
I'm drinking.
I was going to say Iggy Pop. I have to say the Ramones though, just because of the simple fact that I think they're such a hodgepodge, and there's always the classic debate of was it the Ramones, was it the Sex Pistols, and in the UK. I think for a lot of people, like when they think about especially people who aren't necessarily involved in the punk scene, I think their go-to that was the original was the Ramones.
Well, yeah, I think it's especially at least from the U.S. Mm-hmm. A lot of us are always going to go right to the Ramones, if not for any other reason than the first classic punk band that I think any of us have ever listened to is a Ramones song or Ramones album, something like that. Oh,
absolutely. For me, it was the first punk album that I ever owned.
Yeah. Same here.
And I think the other big part about this that makes that question so difficult to answer as well is because there's so many different facets of things that fall under the punk umbrella. There is, 77 style punk, which are bands like the Sex Pistols. I mean, those are the main ones. There's the 82 style of, UK 82 style of punk, which is, bands like GBH and, The Exploited and things like that. But it goes from there. I mean, there's so many other styles of music that fall into that same category. I mean, even people can talk about Patti Smith being punk and all these different things. Early David Bowie, Iggy Pop and the Stooges, those kinds of things.
The only reason I always guess is because it's the most non-confrontational response someone could give. Because while, a lot of people wouldn't consider Iggy Pop punk, he did kind of inspire some of those bands like... All right.
Are the mics picking that up?
Yeah, of course. Kids playing with the
Alexa.
The Alexa.
I might have to go. We might have a musical background to this one.
As long as we don't get a copyright strike.
right.
From Amazon. I'm not paying that bill.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Iggy Pop is a safe answer because while a lot of people don't consider him punk, a lot of people who like punk music like Iggy Pop. He also inspired some of the bands, I believe New York Dolls actually came before the Ramones as well.
Yeah, they definitely did.
While they're not credited with being a punk band, I shouldn't say that. While a lot of people don't credit them as starting the punk scene, a lot of people very much credit them as being a punk band.
Right.
And a lot of punk music, is New York Dolls influence.
And again, it's tough. I mean, I think a lot of people they like to think that the band that started punk was probably the band that introduced them to it, which I fall into that category.
Right.
And again, I think, like I said, I listened to pop punk, and before I was into music to any real extent, I was into skateboarding, and there's a certain kind of
skater punk,
culture that's in it, bands
the Offspring,
Offspring. Early Offspring, man, so good.
Early Offspring's great, yeah.
Until they decided that they wanted to sound like the Foo Fighters. But I mean, X-Nay on the Ombre and Smash, those are great albums.
Smash was my favorite, yeah.
Oh yeah,
for a long time.
And then I mean, even bands like the Bouncing Souls and stuff like that were bands that I was all super into.
Yeah.
So, but
were you ever into NoFX?
NoFX was one of those bands that if they were on, I liked it.
Yeah.
But I was never obsessed with them.
Yeah.
I
wasn't really I wasn't really. I couldn't get into them.
They have some catchy riffs though.
Yeah.
They definitely have some catchy riffs.
I didn't care for the guy's voice.
Oh, Fat Mike or whatever it is.
Fat Mike, yeah. He insulted a lot of us new scene kids too. You know about that?
No, I have no idea what did he say.
Well, there's one theory as to why skater punk sort of phased out and pop punk became the new craze. And the theory is kind of that it's as some of the younger kids were starting to get into that style of music, and some of these newer bands started coming in that were a little bit more on the pop punk side and stuff. Fat Mike was one of these idealists who basically thought, that everyone coming into it was a poser.
Oh, okay.
And so he was very outspoken about it. And so one of the thoughts is that it's like, well, if you're a young kid just getting into this new type of music that excites you, would you rather listen to the asshole who's telling you to go fuck off, or would you rather listen to some of the newer stuff that's coming out? As pop punk is kind of considered more of an all-inclusive type of music,
Well, and I'll say it's probably more, or pop punk is probably more. It's more appealing. It's more poppy. Hence the name. Yeah. But more people who aren't into punk like pop punk just because it's a catchy style of music.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think even like bands like Blink-182 fall into that category. I don't want to say everybody likes Blink-182, but anybody listens to them. There's not one specific, personality type that likes Blink-182 kind of thing.
Right.
So, but yeah, for me, and it's hard to, I still like a lot of those bands. The bands that I originally started off listening to that were like those original punk bands. Yeah. I still listen to a lot of those bands all the time. Like I said, Ramones, Clash, Sex Pistols, I always listen to those bands. Even things like more into like the hard, not when I say hardcore realm, I don't necessarily mean hardcore music, but more like harder style of punk. Yeah. Whether it be like Fall of a Frat-Fro, I still enjoy.
For sure.
Tragedy, From Ashes Rise. I was just listening to them the other day. All those bands are still bands that on a regular basis I can still listen to pretty frequently.
So I think it's your turn to ask me a question.
Okay. I'm going to get a little bit personal with this one.
Okay.
Thing within our friend group that you were most embarrassed about.
Thing that I myself was embarrassed about?
Yes.
Okay. So it doesn't encompass like if one of our friends did something and I was like, fuck, that's embarrassing.
No, it's something that you did.
It's something that I did?
Yes. Can I say my answer?
Yeah.
And you probably know what I'm going to say?
Yeah.
So should I be discreet?
No, go for it.
Okay. So at one of our buddies' bachelor parties, all of us were quite inebriated. And we were all staying at a cabin down in a place in a couple hours from where we all live. And as the night went on, we all just kept drinking. And I think at some point I had to go to bed.
It was a bachelor party, so we were all drinking heavily.
Right. So either way, the night ends up kind of progressing. And we all wake up the next morning. And, I think there was like a hot tub there. And people were just hanging out, relaxing. And it turns out that Steve, my old buddy, my old pal, got so inebriated that he didn't realize that the door to get into the house was a door that you just turn the knob and open. And he thought it was a sliding door, and was unable to get into the house to go to bed that night. So without having any other options, and I correct me because this is the way that I remember you telling it. Uh-huh. You said, okay, well, I'll go see if any of the cars are unlocked, and proceeded to find a car to sleep in that had the doors that were unlocked. Yeah. And it ended up being my car. Yeah. That's got to be, if that's not the most embarrassing thing, I don't know. We both have some that are pretty.
You're wrong.
Oh!
You're wrong.
I didn't.
I'm actually.
Wow.
Am I embarrassed about that one? Yeah, a little. Well, obviously, but
true.
Yeah, the door. True. By the way, I don't know if you explained this, but the door was unlocked the entire time. I was like pulling on the glass because I thought for some reason it was a sliding glass door. Mm-hmm. After I had just walked out of it like 10 minutes prior.
Well, and the other part that I think is even more amusing is that there was probably about, let's say, 15 of us at this bachelor party, and the door opened up to the living room where there were people sleeping, or they weren't even sleeping at that point. So all Steve would have had to do was knock on the door and somebody would have let him in.
No, my most embarrassing moment is when I won't say specifics because I don't know. I don't know if we should get into this aspect of our lives, but basically you and I had a little like bet going on during like late teens, early young adult period. Okay. Our friend did have a party that we were at and we were drinking at, and I was acting very ridiculous all night, and I proceeded to get very drunk. And our friends told us that you had won this bet, this thing that we bet on. And I was so inebriated in my angst, I ran out to my car and locked myself in my car. And I was screaming something along the lines of, "No one's ever going to respect me ever again." Because John beat me at this certain thing.
I don't even think I did. I don't think at that point.
You guys lied to me. You guys lied to me.
Was I part of this? Did I lie about it? Because I feel like there's.
Yeah, I think you lied about it. Because I think that was the joke, is you guys were going to make me like think that it happened and see how I'd react. And that's how I chose to react.
Locking yourself in your car and
yeah, wailing like an idiot.
Sounds like a Steve move.
Yeah, that was my most embarrassing moment.
All right.
Wow, I had a much easier question lined up for you. Who is your favorite president?
Oh, God. Who do you think I'm going to say?
I think you're going to tell me FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
I was actually going to go with Trump.
Shut up. Fuck off.
No. So FDR used to be. I will say that FDR used to be.
You're not going to tell me Trump, are you?
No, I'm not going to tell you Trump.
Jesus.
No. FDR used to be, but then I found out there were some things that, not to say that I don't think FDR was a bad president by any means.
Right.
I think that he was the president we needed for the time that or I say we, like I was alive in the 1930s and 40s. Right. The president that the country needed at that time. I think in terms of my favorite president, can I pick two?
Sure. I mean, I already lost, so yeah. Why not?
Favorite president probably on policy, Lincoln. Any president that ends slavery and does it in the way that he did. I think Lincoln, again, was another president that whether and not to say that everything he did was good, or the same thing with FDR, not to say that everything FDR did was bad.
No one's hands are clean.
Right.
We know this.
But I definitely think that he was the president that we needed for the time. Mm-hmm. And he got a lot of things done that needed to be done.
I'm just going to take a drink for Lincoln's sake. Fuck yeah, Lincoln. Cheers to Lincoln.
Second choice. And this is pure, for pure entertainment value, is...
Wait, can I guess?
Yes.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, God, I should have said Teddy Roosevelt. I didn't. I was going to say Bill Clinton.
Oh.
Just because I have no clue on policy, everything that Bill Clinton did, but man, was he fun to like this. I remember being like 7 or 8 years old, watching all the drama go down and watching him play saxophone on late night television.
So can you fathom? Just wrap your head around something for a minute, okay? Mm-hmm. So we now have an acting president in office, mm-hmm. who before. He was even president-elect when mm-hmm. this was still in campaign time. Mm-hmm. He had tapes coming out about him,
right? Of
him graphically talking about grabbing a woman by the pussy.
Right.
He furthermore had a scandal happening while acting president, mm-hmm. Where he was sleeping with a porn star.
Multiple. Oh, no, I know it was one for sure, but I think there was more than one.
His own guy was speaking out,
mm-hmm.
basically admitted that he was giving her hush money.
Oh.
And that's been going on for these last few years. Clinton gets involved in a scandal because he's getting blown by an intern. Mm-hmm. And we all but damn near crucified him. We carved out the cross. We got the nails ready, and we were ready to drag him out through the mud and hang him up on a cross. How does that make sense? Can you fathom that happened in the 90s?
I can, but here's why. Oh. Here's why. All right?
I should probably started something I shouldn't have.
I'll say this. Now, again, don't quote me on the backstory here. I know there was more with Clinton that... There's more things that potentially, or at least from what I'm told, Clinton's had allegedly done. I don't know if it was before or if it was known or like I don't know anything about that.
Are we going down like the Clinton Foundation scandals?
No, I don't know anything about that. Well, I don't want to say I don't know about some of that stuff, but I don't know enough about it to
Those
be
are
like,
fun.
Those rabbit holes.
Those are fun rabbit holes to go
That's
down.
a conspiracy theory for another day.
Yeah, that leads into like that leads into everything from like covered up deaths to pedophile rings. Like it gets really.
Oh, you're talking about
really,
Pizzagate?
Well, Pizzagate's part of it. Yeah,
I know a little bit about that. I don't know like the full details of all of it or what's alleged. But I will say this: I think that one of the things that's very interesting about politics, and I think I'm pretty interested in a lot of politics, especially like on a philosophical side. Like I'm interested in like political philosophy and the different, not necessarily like the left-right paradigm, but like kind of like the founding principles that kind of were used to establish our country.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things. But I will say this, especially after watching, watching politics since at least I've been able to be old enough to remember it. I always say I hate reality TV, but it is one giant reality show. Like, especially, and I'll say this past, I'll say 2 years or 3 years or whatever it's been now has been, Emmy-winning reality TV, to say the least.
Well, you're talking about the president who was a former reality TV
show. Right.
So
next week on Trump,
exactly.
Who will be fired?
Yeah, exactly.
I guess so. My follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Who is your least favorite president?
I have my answer.
Okay. Now, for this one, I assume that you could say Trump. But I'm not going to pick that one because that's the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, let's just not. I didn't even, because that's just, yeah.
So I'm going to go with one of the Bushes, maybe.
It's not a bad guess.
Just because I know politically where you stand.
Actually, to be fair, George Sr. Was not that bad of a president. I mean, to be honest, if we're talking about Republican presidents, George Sr. was nothing to be feared, and especially some of his policies were they were more like, he was more like a moderate conservative, I'd say. George Jr., if he could, I'd take him today in a heartbeat compared to what's going on now.
Okay.
No, this is kind of unfair, but because it would have been a hard one to guess, but I would have to say, just based on the little known presidential history that I know, Franklin Pierce is the one that I hate the most.
I don't know anything about Franklin.
Yeah,
Pierce.
well, all I really know about him is a lot of historians blame him for setting the Civil War in motion to begin with. He kind of set the stages for everything to go south before Lincoln took office.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that's kind of, I know it's like it's a cheap.
You can tell our nerddom though.
It's kind of a cop-out answer, but that is, when I'm thinking about what I know about presidents, I can't say, okay, yeah, I could have picked someone like Andrew Jackson too.
That's who I was thinking.
Because Andrew Jackson was a piece of shit, but he loved to party.
And kill Indians.
Yeah, he killed a lot of
natives,
people, but he loved to party.
Right.
Lincoln signed the death warrant of a bunch of Native Americans too. And then I guess I could say Zachary Taylor, but again, all I know about him is he was kind of a piece of crap, and he really didn't know how to be a president in the first place. So I just picked someone that I know did something evil.
And that makes sense. It's hard because I think, but especially when it comes to presidents, again, Republican or Democrat, there's things that you can look at a lot of presidents and go, that was a good choice.
Yeah.
Very good. And then there's a lot of them where you could look at them and go, not a good choice.
Yep.
So it's a difficult question because I think even bad presidents sometimes had a few good policies and then vice versa. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there was, in fact, some sort of conspiracy behind the JFK assassination?
Do I believe that there was a second shooter?
Doesn't even have to be that.
I don't think that.
Well, wait. So just to be clear, before you answer, the question is just, was it done by, what we know it to be. Was it just a maniac with a good arm and a lucky shot? Or is there something behind it that we don't know, something that has still not been declassified that we're not being told? So is it a conspiracy, or is it as straightforward as they have given, they meaning like, the higher powers,
the Illuminati,
the shadow government?
Okay, so I think if there's any conspiracy that's involved with it, I would say that it's probably more that, and again, this is me coming from a completely uneducated perspective on it.
Yeah, so I am going to say you're going to tell me that it's something more complex.
Well, I wouldn't even necessarily say complex. I would say more like, I don't think it was our government that would be the ones who are like orchestrating it. I think it would probably be potentially the Russians, or well, I shouldn't say the Russians, but the Soviet Union. I know Lee Harvey Oswald was a communist, if I remember. I know he spent some time in, I don't know if it was the Soviet Union. I think he tried to get into the Soviet Union at one point, and they wouldn't let him in.
He also spent time in Cuba.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay. No, I guess I'll say this. I have a tendency to believe that there was probably, like, I think here's even a good example, and you can use modern times for this. I think that if there's any conspiracy that was kind of surrounding it, it was probably more from the perspective of politicians trying to figure out how they could spin this to be in their favor somehow. And that kind of taking root potentially in society.
So the government might have not had something to do with it, but they might have certainly not done anything to stop it.
Right.
Gotcha.
So that's a tough one, though. Because, again, to be honest, like, I'm one of those people that I always go evidence. Where's the evidence? Yeah. But when it comes to things like that, it's tough because there's a lot of evidence out there, and people could look at it and go, well, here, like, look at the trajectory of the bullet and the way it bounced. And, I don't know, how bullets,
right,
anything about the trajectory of bullets and how they impact and how, because I think for what it was him, he got shot in the head, but it came out his back was one of the things and stuff like that. I don't know if that's possible. I've heard it was, but
I definitely think that there was only one shooter. Oswald was I believe he was a Green Beret.
Yeah.
Or an Army Ranger.
So yeah, something, I think Special Forces. Yeah.
So, he obviously knew what he was doing. I think maybe it was luck that he hit I can't remember his
JFK?
JFK, but
John
the other guy that he hit.
Oh,
who happened to be behind him.
Yeah.
I think that was just luck. I think JFK was the only target.
Right.
I definitely do question, though, what motive there was.
Okay. Right.
JFK might, I've heard all kinds of interesting theories too, because this happened sometime after the Bay of Pigs.
Right.
Right. Kennedy, also after kind of having that whole thing blow up, had a lot of military, people in the military who kind of felt like fucked over by that whole scenario.
Right.
And I also know that if you watch some of like Kennedy's, some of his other speeches, or if you watch his famous "Ask Not What your country can do for
the
you,"
space race, right?
If you watch it in full length, it's very interesting. He had a lot of radical ideas about things he wanted to do. Not only that, when you think about the space race, he was openly forcing people to basically make promises, or he would make promises, and then people were like kind of, forced into, I guess, seeing that they were done,
Right.
When he said that we were going to go to the moon, everyone at NASA was scrambling around going like, well, what?
How do we do this?
Yeah. So I think that Kennedy was a very interesting personality, and I question what, if any, the actual motive was behind the assassination.
Okay, so you think it wasn't just straightforward as like a political radical? You think there was more to it?
Yeah, I kind of wonder.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could be on board with that. I definitely think so. And I definitely think that he was spouting off some ideas. I think even like that idea of ask not what your country can do for you, but you can do for your country. I mean, ideologically speaking, there's a lot of conservatives who don't like that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My follow-up question then for that.
Yeah.
Of all conspiracy theories, and I know you have more of a knowledge in this subject than I do.
Uh-huh.
What conspiracy theory do you think, if not you believe in 100%, is probably the most possible or plausible?
Yeah, I think you know what I'm going to say on this one, probably.
I would assume, and this is tough because we know it's true, is like MK Ultra and like that, because we know there is some, there's, or like that and like Project Blue Book, where there's truths to it. These are real things.
Yeah, right.
To the extent of, what people are claiming to be. Well, that's, that's where the debate comes in. So I don't know which one and you know more about this than I do though. So I would probably say one of those two would probably be your go-to.
I mean, I definitely see more plausibility, honestly, in kind of a Kennedy assassination cover-up over a lot of things. MK Ultra, we know, has been declassified.
Right.
We know that Project Blue Book was declassified. I don't know if this is like really an answer to your question, but obviously the first thing that ever got me interested in a conspiracy is the one that I still look at and go over all the time is the supposed Roswell crash of the 1940s.
Okay.
Is it plausible? It's funny because like at one time that was my go-to conspiracy and that was like my Rosetta Stone,
okay,
but over the years I've gone back and forth on that one a lot. Maybe in a sense it's still kind of the most plausible because obviously, I guess plausible in the sense that like if something did happen, like an alien an alien spacecraft crashing into the desert, then it's plausible why we would want to cover something like that up.
Right.
I also see why it's perfectly plausible that if it was nothing more than a very sophisticated piece of military equipment that we were testing out at the time that we did not want to, disclose to the public yet. There's also plausibility for that too.
Right.
And I've actually gone back and forth on both. There's a lot of things that support this idea that it was nothing more than, it
was a weather balloon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's projects. I think because this project was actually recently declassified a few years ago too, called, I think it was Project Weatherlight or something.
Okay.
And this is the thing that a lot of people look at and go, well, this is your Roswell right here, because it was high altitude weather balloon testing. And they were testing some sophisticated materials and so forth. Some of the materials that's described in the Roswell case reports are very similar to kind of like the materials that this thing was made of. But at the same time, there's other aspects to that story that still make me go back and say, I don't know. I think there's something more there.
There's more to it.
I would just be so bold as to say that, yeah, I think there have been a few either documented or undocumented cases of actual visitation on this planet that I would definitely not rule out and automatically say, no, I don't think that happened. There are some very intriguing, weird, I'll give you, but intriguing stories that I've read before that I look at and go, well, I don't see the motivation for this person to lie.
Right.
Because they're not making any money out of it. They're not going to get famous. They're going to be labeled crazy on this side, if anything. They're well known within their community. So they're not known to like just fabricate stories. And then you have other stories too, like this, that Stan Romanek guy who is videotaping aliens popping up in front of his window, where you just like you can listen to the guy's story and you can watch his, I'm using air quotes, documented evidence, and you know this guy's just full of shit.
It looks like something on a stick, or like a puppet, right?
Yeah,
right.
Like that stuff, obviously, it's very discreditable. But there's other stories that I have read about that I definitely look at and go, I'm not quite ready to say like this is total bullshit.
Right, you're not ready to close the book on it.
Yeah, exactly.
And see, I agree with all of that, and I think if there's one conspiracy that I would say I 100% believe is possible, I believe it's, and I'm going to preface this with saying that I don't necessarily know if we've been visited. I don't know if there's been abductions, but I 100% believe that there is some kind of extraterrestrial life that exists. Whether we've,
sure.
Well, obviously, I think I don't think that it's a situation where the government knows about it and they're hiding it from us, and Tom DeLonge is going to break it to all of us.
Yeah, Tom DeLonge is our savior.
Right. I don't necessarily believe that. Well, I guess I'll say it like this. I don't necessarily think that that's true, but I don't. If it was true, I wouldn't be like, oh, well, oh my God, the world's going to end. I'd be like, well, there's some understanding as to why something like that would not necessarily be like a catastrophic earth-ending information if it was to like leak out that there were extraterrestrials. Right. But there could be some existential issues that could be brought up with that could cause some pretty significant mass hysteria.
So what's your take then on people who actually claim that they've been abducted? Like, in your opinion, from like the stories you've heard and stuff, are they all lying or fabricating them up? Do they actually believe that something really did happen to them? And if so, like what would your take be? I mean, if you think they're all full of shit, I know a lot of them are. Right. Trust me, I've seen plenty of stories where I think, yeah, this person is totally full of shit. But there's others where, I watch and I think it's really hard to discredit because they sound very truthful. They sound like they believe it. Maybe if it didn't happen, I don't know, what is the explanation then, but
so I guess here kind of is my kind of thought process on it. And again, this is not to say that, like I said, like if all of a sudden tomorrow news came out and they were like, there are extraterrestrials and people are abducted, I'd be like, that's insane. That's crazy. Like crazy.
I'm terrified.
Not like, yeah, right. In that kind of way.
I'd be like that guy in War of the Worlds digging underground. You remember him in the basement? Yeah. Not my blood. Not my blood.
God, I'm trying to think who played that character too.
I don't know.
It's the guy from Shawshank Redemption, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right.
But no, I guess I'll put it like this. I mean, obviously, I think that people, when people can capitalize on something for some kind of financial profit, it's very easy to make up stories for that. So obviously, I think there's some of that. The part that I think is a little bit more interesting is then to ask, do I believe that there's people who genuinely believe that these things have happened to them? Or do I guess I'll put it in I think the way that you phrased it is, do I believe that people are lying when they're saying that these things happen to them? And here's what I'll compare it to, at least for I think a portion of them. When somebody who has like schizophrenia or a psychotic disorder tells you they're seeing something, they're not lying to you. Or when they're telling you that they're hearing voices, they're not lying to you.
Sure.
And from a psychological standpoint, when you're working with people who struggle with those kind of issues, you don't question, I don't want to say you don't question them on it, but you don't tell them their reality is not right. Because I mean, emotionally, the impact of that can be significantly traumatic. But they're not lying, and I think that is, at least, a percentage of people who are reporting these things happen to them. I think that could be a very big possibility, is that they're not lying that they think that these things happen to them. Now, whether it's actually happening to them is another story. But, if you ask, again, somebody who has schizophrenia, if you ask them if they're hearing voices and they say yes, or if you ask them, is God talking to you? And they say yes, from their perspective, they're not lying.
Right.
Now, obviously, we know that there's more to it than that, but I think it probably falls more into that category. And I guess here's the other thing that I'll point about it too, is part of, I think, my interest in this is I want it to be true.
Well, yeah.
Like, I want there to be some kind of extraterrestrial life. Not necessarily because of like some kind of like, I wouldn't expect some kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of like there's a lot of, and everybody lives together.
And everyone's listening to 8-Track.
Right. Not like anything like that, but I think it would make our galaxy or our universe immensely more interesting to know that there is some planet out there in, out there in the Andromeda galaxy or wherever that has another civilization that's attempting to do the same kind of things that we are.
I'm popping open another beast.
I barely cracked the seal of mine.
Yeah, you're not drinking like a man, John.
Oh God.
So no, that's interesting. And I've heard a lot of interesting theories that I think are very plausible, like I'm sure you've heard before the theory that people who might see these things may actually be suffering from sleep paralysis because it is very, a lot of the stories are very similar. They also relate to other stories. If you know about like the shadow people stories or the Hat Man stories, they're all like, they have these similar features. And of course, one of the big ones being that you're paralyzed and you have people looking over you. That all is very like, that's a very, interesting take that I could see being a large chunk of what some of these cases are. Right. Another interesting one that I've actually heard Rogan talk about on his podcast a few times is, I don't know who actually came up with this theory, but this one stems to this idea that it's actually kind of repressed memories from childbirth. Because when you really think about the fact that you're in like this, this one environment and you're basically being ripped out into a new world. It explains like the medical equipment, your eyes don't work right, so shapes are distorted, so you've got the bulbous heads, giant eyes theory. Right. You don't really know how to use your body yet, so you're associating that with paralysis, and it's a very kind of probably very traumatic feeling for a child, for an infant. And more these days, they're discovering that, like, we used to believe that infants at very early ages are not capable of remembering certain things like that. Right. But these are memories that a lot of people now are discovering are still very deeply rooted. We might not remember them as adults, but they are still there. We still remember these things, Right. So that's another interesting theory. So and then the last thing that I question a lot is that sometimes I think when people are having certain feelings that they can't explain, if they're interested in this sort of stuff too, like they want this idea to be true, right? So like if I'm starting to like have funny sleep patterns and stuff like this, and I start maybe thinking to myself, I wonder if I was abducted. A lot of people go to hypnotherapists and do like this hypno regression. Now I'm not actually saying that hypno regression is a bunch of bunk. I actually think in a lot of cases it has a lot of value. Right. Actually, one day I want to do one of those like past life regression things.
That'd be cool.
Yeah,
that'd be cool.
That'd be a good thing. It would be cool if we could find someone and like we could go do that for the show too. I'd be interested to hear like what everyone
our past lives were.
But I think part of the problem is some of these people who specialize more in. Excuse me.
The beast.
The beast is coming out. That's the roar of the beast, friends.
Oh God.
I think if you go to someone who specializes more in these certain cases or is more inclined to believe in the same things, in order to get a regression out, they ask leading questions. I've seen some videos before, and I don't know if they're just doing it for dramatic effect for the video's sake, but like, I think it was a Vice interview I did once, or I didn't do a Vice interview, a Vice interview that I watched once, where they were interviewing a woman who specializes in like regression therapy for people who believe they've been abducted.
Okay.
And like a lot of the questions are
What a
very,
speciality.
yeah, I know, right? But a lot of the questions are very leading to me, you know?
And I know just from, doing like therapy and things like that, that when I say doing therapy, I don't mean me in therapy, but
Right.
like being a therapist. The way you have to word things, it has to be very, very specific in
Right.
what you're trying to achieve. So like, for example, if I'm trying to get information from somebody, then I'm asking very open-ended questions. And a lot of times I'm not even asking questions at all. It's, you're ultimately reframing things. So like if somebody tells me something that happened to them, I would reframe what they just told me in an attempt to, one, acknowledge or see them know that, okay, this person's listening to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And typically what that also does is make them feel more comfortable and giving me more information. Now, with that being said, if I'm trying to lead them towards a certain conclusion, or especially like a frame of mind, then I'll frame things in a way where I'm trying to get them in that kind of headspace. So for example, if I'm dealing with somebody who has self-esteem issues, I'll ask very specific questions that are based on things that they find positive about themselves or things that they feel like they've accomplished. So you're leading them to try to, if their self-esteem issues come from, a lack of feeling accomplished in different things, then I would ask simple questions, questions as simple as, tell me things that you feel like are your strengths. Tell me things like you feel, or a time where you felt like you succeeded at a challenge. So you're wording things in a specific way to direct their mind into a certain place.
Right.
Which, I mean, I could see people very easily doing that in situations like this, where you're trying to, you're talking about past life regressions and things like that. The other big part about it too, I think, is that you condone answers that you want them to say. So if they say something along the lines of, I remember a red room, you say something along the lines of, yes, the room was red. And you're confirming what they're saying without any kind of knowledge of whether or not it's true.
Right.
First off, and secondly, you're putting it into this box that you want it to be in. So it's, your room's red because in a past life you lived in a room, or your bedroom was red, or because there was a significant event that happened in a room that was painted red,
right,
or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, it's tough because I think a lot of those kinds of things are interesting, especially I'll say not even necessarily past life stuff, but like early childhood memories. I know, even like referencing Mysterious Universe again. They had an episode recently where they were talking about people who are reportedly having like memories of things before they were born.
Right.
Like they were kind of like watching their parents and they chose their parents.
Yeah, I listened to that episode.
Like that
was good.
It's interesting stuff. Now, again, do I think it's true? Not at all. But is it interesting to explore? Absolutely. And I think that's, especially when diving into the conspiracy realm, that's one of the things that I think is of one of my biggest frustrations is the idea that, and now don't get me wrong, I think that there's definitely conspiracy theories that you can look at and at face value, kick them to the curb. Like there's just nothing, there's no truth in that. But there's some of them that you could potentially look at and go, maybe this isn't true in and of itself, but it can open up a door into exploring areas that could be somewhat enlightening.
So what you're telling me is that you've never once thought that the Earth might actually be flat.
No, not at all. But you know what? Let me give you what I mean though.
But how fun would it? Going back to what you said a little bit ago. It's an even more ridiculous example, but like you look at these conspiracies because you want them to be true, because ultimately they're just fun.
Right.
But like that's the difference between logic or using logic and just kind of falling into that belief system. I'm going to be honest, man. If I found out like tomorrow that they actually discovered the Earth was flat, I would be losing my mind.
Right.
It's I've said this on past episodes before. What a brave new world that would be. Oh,
absolutely.
But I'm sorry, go back to your point.
So here's one that I think that the idea gets shut down really quick.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to blame anybody for shutting it down. I'll say it like that. But is the idea of intelligent design. Now, when I say intelligent design, I say that with the complete utmost understanding that when people hear that, they think creationism, which is, the idea that God created humans.
Right.
Now, I think that obviously people frame it like that because that's the framework which we most readily hear it in.
It's the oldest frame of reference we have to compare it to. Yeah.
But I don't think questioning whether or not, and when I say something designed us, I don't think that's a ridiculous question. And when I say something, I don't necessarily mean, again, it had to be some kind of God type figure, but who's to say we weren't planted here? Who's to say we by some kind of other, hyper advanced species? Yeah. Who's to say that we're not who's to say that we're not part of a simulation or some kind of hologram or something like that? Now, with all those being said, I'm not going to be the person that's going to bet my money on it. I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, this is what happened. But I'm saying it's an interesting topic to I think to research in. So, you know what I mean?
So what I hear you saying is you're not saying it was aliens. But it was aliens.
It was totally aliens. No, but again, it's just again, for me, I think that until the book can be closed, here's a good example.
Yeah, right.
I know gravity exists. Why do I know gravity exists? Because every time I drop something, it falls. And
or maybe that's mass.
Well,
arguing on a flat earther's side.
Oh God,
what the fuck do you know about gravity, John?
That's aliens too. But no, I know that that's going to happen. So I can shut the book on the idea that if I drop something, it's going to fall. If I let go of something, it's going to fall. Now, there's obviously arguments as to, Einstein's theory of relativity, and obviously we know that works, but there's other questions as to it doesn't work on a quantum level. So there's a lot of different other things going on there too.
Yeah, right.
But I think the bigger point that I'm trying to make is that especially if you look at evolution, for example, not to say that I don't believe in evolution, because obviously I do, and the vast majority of people I know do.
Yeah.
But there's still always that question of there has to be something alive to start that process of evolution. What made it so at one day there was nothing alive and then the next day there was? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, right.
And just to assume that it happened through natural causes, I'm not going to say that that's not possible.
Sure.
But as we've already shown, we can create, intelligences to varying degrees. If we can do that, what's to say that there's not a hyper or a more advanced thing out there that can do that on a more advanced level than we can do?
I would argue I feel the same way about reincarnation, honestly. Because we know, I guess if you want to get into a physics kind of perspective of it, we know that matter cannot be created nor destroyed.
Right.
We don't really know.
Energy can't be created.
Yeah, energy cannot be created or destroyed. We know very little about the human psyche. For as big of our brains as we have, we don't really know about. We know that for millennia, we've had this concept of the soul and of basically the body, or even if you don't want to call it a soul, the body is nothing more than a vessel for the mind. So I'm not willing to say that, when our bodies die, that our minds don't go somewhere. And I think that in a lot of different, because we're kind of getting more into kind of paranormal realm type stuff. If there's anything that I would strongly say that I look at and I kind of raise an eyebrow and go, I could probably see something to that, it would definitely be reincarnation. Because absolutely. I do see, compared to some of the other religions and some of the different types of theology, or some of the different types of theories that I've heard or read about, I think that one makes a lot of sense to me. So,
well, and I think it breaks up the broader point too, where there's a lot of things that we just don't know. And I don't like the idea of even extreme, or I wouldn't say extreme, but theories about those things that aren't necessarily mainstream.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that those things should just have the door shut on them completely.
Right.
Now, again, not to say that there's not things that, again, like I said,
YouTube seems to think so.
Right. Just throwing it out there.
Just kidding, YouTube.
But no, like, I mean, for example, like I said, like even with like intelligent design, people are very quick to close the door on that.
Right.
Okay, I can get the idea of closing the door on creationism, like believing that there's like this ultimate higher power that we refer to as God that created us. I think the door can be closed on that for, I think, two reasons. One, because I'm not a big fan of religion and science mixing. I don't think that.
Well, and I think that's some of that too. You're being biased about as well. Don't forget, because I wouldn't necessarily say that that's something you can completely. If you're talking about this concept of intelligent design, that's not necessarily that you can. It's completely excluded by anyone's standards. But for you, it is, and that's totally. I see where you're going with that.
Well, and I guess I put it like this. I think if it is something that we refer to as God, I think at least in terms of like the intelligent design standpoint, I think it probably is more of us defining God more in terms of something that we just can't conceptualize.
Well, yeah.
Rather than God fitting the textbook version of what.
Well, yeah.
The
God could be the machine,
right,
in the simulator that controls the simulation we are.
It's the Matrix.
They could be. They could be the Anunnaki.
Right. Well, and again, and that's the hard part about it is, again, do I think it's true? I would probably err on the, maybe 5%, 20%, maybe.
Right.
But that 5 or 20% still means that there's questions that we don't have answers to.
Right.
And I think I don't think we should just close the door on those answers or those questions, just because. And I'll say it like this: I think even more so, we shouldn't close doors to questions that strictly because they challenge our worldview of what we already have.
Sure.
Which I think, and again, I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this. I think most people are to a certain extent, but it's very easy to reach predictions.
Right.
Well, I'll say it like this. It's very easy to have accurate predictions when you're closing every other avenue that could potentially lead to a different answer. Now, I know, I don't want to apply intent to people that they're actively doing this, or like something like that, or like, scientists are, and they know they're not giving us accurate information because that information would lead them to conclusions that they don't want us to lead to. But, and again, and I don't necessarily think that, I guess I'll put it like this. I don't view science as a like moral thing. Science is either this is how it works or this is not how it works.
Right.
And for some reason, I think people like to combine the two. People like to think that because things work like this, that means that we should behave like this.
Yeah.
Which for me are two completely separate questions.
Well, I like how you put it when you said, again, more or less to sum up what you were saying, you got to keep an open mind that, just because it's not something you strongly believe in, because your background does not really support that type of logic, does not necessarily mean that it should be discredited entirely. And with that, I really kind of hope we take that philosophy and we put it in practice when we go to the Bigfoot conference in a month, right? So I think we really should do that. And nobody probably knows what we're talking about, but every year there is a big Bigfoot conference out in I think it's Salt Fork.
Yep, Salt Fork State Park.
Yeah, Salt Fork State Park, right?
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half away from us.
Yeah,
so not too far.
So I'm all on board. You want to go?
Absolutely, I want
to go. All right. Well, then that'll be an episode way further down the line. But I don't know. You want to call time of death?
I'm cool with it.
Okay, great. Well, if you are listening, thanks for listening. Maybe you heard it on Spotify. Maybe you heard it on Stitcher. Because we are on both of those platforms. Maybe by the time this was posted and you listened to it, you were listening on Google Play. You may not be listening to it, however, on iTunes. Come on, iTunes. What did we do wrong?
Nothing.
Yeah, I'm going to look into that issue tonight. I'm a little perturbed by that one.
Understandably so. Understandably so.
So maybe we'll be on iTunes. But also, you can listen to the show directly at isitinYetPodcast.com. You just go to the blog page. We post all kinds of information about when the shows come up. Some future information will also be up at our Facebook page at Is It In Yet Podcast, and you can also find us on Twitter at Is It In Yet Show. And then the YouTube page. You can also get the show if you're the kind of person I was when I was working in the office or whatever. I could just go to YouTube and listen to my podcasts on YouTube. So it'll all be there. Thanks for listening. I'm Steve.
I'm John.
We'll see you soon.